Welcome to the Random Campfire. This episode is about wood turning, the making of useful lidded pots. Tools we require, other than a lathe, are some chisels. I'm going to use just these four: a cut-off chisel, two flats, and an adapted chisel which we'll use later for widening out the hole. Materials and setup. In the original picture, the left-hand three pots were all made of sawn pine. They were the test pieces. This time I'm going to use a piece of teak. The object is to create this all-in-one turned pot with the stopper and the main body surrounded by two small pieces of scrap wood. First we need to cut ourselves a piece of timber. This needs to be long enough for the body, the stopper and those two scrap ends. Now we need to find the middle. By drawing lines across the piece of timber, we will then create a dot in the center. This needs doing on both ends. Once done, we can use those dots as the points for mounting the timber onto the lathe. Then, to be certain that we've got it in the right place, we should spin up the lathe. Time to set the rest to the right height. Stick an outline onto our rest so we know roughly where we're going to be cutting. And now it is time to turn whichever shape cross end you've got, be it a square or hexagonal, into a nice cylinder. To turn this into a cylinder, first we're going to take some shallow, small bites with the chisel. Just using about a quarter of the chisel each time and taking a little bit of wood off. Once done, we can continue, but going a little deeper each time. Being that this is teak, it is a good idea to be wearing a dust mask. As you can see, this is reasonably round now. It is time to sand. First of all, with a nice coarse sandpaper, keeping your fingers well out of the way. Now for a finer grade sandpaper to smooth it off. There you have your smooth cylinder. Now it is time to actually turn our pot. We're going to turn the outside, we're going to sand it off, and then we're going to bore the inside out. Our first job, using the marks we put on our rest, is to put in some thin lines where each of the cuts are going to be. Now we've got the lines in place, it's time to start cutting. First, we're going to do the two ends where we're going to remove scrap later. This will act as a guide for the bandsaw when we come to remove these bits. This entire section, all I'm going to use is the cut-off chisel. This is a nice thin front point. Now we can start on the cap. Unplug. Carefully taking down the wood between what will be the top of the cap and the bottle itself. Bearing in mind that the amount of wood you take out will define the thickness of the wall eventually of the bottle and the diameter of the hole. Now we've done cutting, it's time to sand, make it all nice and smooth, keeping those fingers well and truly out of the way. And here is the finished item. As you can see, it looks like our plan that we had originally. We have our cut off scrap on each end, we have a cap still attached to the container and the main body. It's now time to turn our cylinder into our pot. To do this, we need to change the headstock and tailstock of the lathe to being a chuck on the head end and a drill bit on the tail end. Now, unlike a normal drill, this one will actually stay still while the piece of timber is spun around it. Once you have everything lined up, you can take a saw and carefully remove what will become the plug. It's now time to smooth off the end, having sawn off the plug. It's now time to start winding that tailstock into the block. As you can see, it starts cutting. You need to be careful while doing this not to generate too much heat in the wood, otherwise you might actually cause a fire. So gently moving it in and out allows it to clear the dust from the hole. Once bored deeply enough, we can move our rest round to the side and use that modified chisel to widen the hole. You must make sure that the rest is in exactly the right height, otherwise your hole will come out the side. This requires only the lightest of touches and gentle pressure to allow it to sink into the wood. I've pre-marked this chisel with some blue tape. That tells me just how deep I need to go so that I don't end up boring the hole out of the bottom of the pot. For this pot I decided to use a beeswax finish. To do this, I placed the lid of the pot on the pot and returned the original head and tail stocks to the lathe. You then run the lathe, running the wax down it and then applying pressure to a piece of cloth, slowly move it up and down. As you can see, the excess wax is peeling off in front while the rest is melting. Once done, it's time to remove those scrap pieces with the bandsaw. This is why we cut those grooves. And manually apply wax to those areas we couldn't polish while it was on the lathe, using a piece of denim and friction to melt the wax. And here is the finished item, a lidded pot. This one is going to be used as a needle case. One of the larger ones that I made out of pine is going to be used for storing thread. Here are some bobbins that I created earlier using another piece of the same teak. I hope you've enjoyed this episode from the Random Campfire by C. Burley Films. If you have, like, share, tell your friends, and I'll see you next time.